So my name is Barnabé Monnot. I'm going to be talking a bit about what's happening outside of the protocol, and in particular the concept of proposer-builder separation and how it's operated with relays and a lot more off-chain infrastructure. So I like to think of a protocol as an abstract object that has certain powers. One of the powers that the protocol has is it's able to give rights to certain participants. We've seen in the previous talk that the protocol empowers validators to perform consensus duties, but it's not the only things that they do. We also have to pack blocks with transactions. We call that the execution duties, and that's what I want to focus on in this talk. So what's interesting is, even though the protocol is the one that originates these rights and gives them to the validators, what we observe in practice is that many validators choose to not exercise the right themselves. Like they choose to give the right to someone else to perform it on their behalf. And this someone else, we know them in Ethereum as builders. And so what we observe is that even though the validators continue to make these consensus duties themselves, they decide to pass along the execution duties to these builders. It's actually a pretty significant, let's say, interaction or market. Today, about 90% of the blocks are built by external builders, and that has been the case since about December 2022, which is 3 months after the merge. And it's not like a trivial market. There's a lot of money that's moving between these parties. So the median payment from the builder to the validator is about $120 per block. So the builder pays the validators to exercise this building right on their behalf. And I'll talk a bit about why that is the case after this. And so there's $1 million paid out daily, and every 12 seconds there is the possibility for this market to come to some kind of agreement between one proposer or one validator and one builder. And so today I want to discuss a bit about why do validators use builders? Where does that relationship come from? I'm going to introduce a bit about MEV and searchers along the way. Then I'll tell you how this relationship is mediated, so how do validators use builders, and I'll talk about the relays which exist today and in-protocol solutions that we're thinking about. And then I also want to zoom out a little bit because it's easy to see these pictures and find, oh, this is very frightening, what about decentralization? And so I want to kind of give you a sense that, yeah, these are trade-offs that are being made, but in my opinion are made in the right direction. And so I'll try to give a few arguments about this. And stop me anytime if you have questions, but I'll try to pause as well. Yeah?
External builders who are not market.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So by builders, I really mean off-chain entities, but I'll go over this as well. Mm-hmm. So why use builders? So you can think of a naive model of block production where the validator suddenly is selected according to this leader selection process that Caspar described, is selected to become the block producer. So they have to make a block, they have to send it over to the network. In particular, this block needs to contain a list of transactions that are sent to them by the users. And so in the most naive model, you really only have two parties. You have a validator who's just like listening to the mempool, which is the place where the pending transactions land. And when it's their turn to make a block, they just query the mempool, take out the transactions that pay them the most fees, and then just add them into their block, usually using not very sophisticated packing algorithms. And so it's a very simple relationship of just users sending their transactions to the network and eventually landing to the validator's doorstep. What has been observed quite dramatically, I would say, in the last 5 years, is that gives a lot of power to the producer. So in particular, the power of last look, like they're the last person in this very small chain. And so they see what the users want to do. So for instance, they see that the user wants to swap something, and they can use that information to extract profit from themselves. And so in the best case, this profit comes from just natural market functions, such as arbitrage. In the worst case, it can come directly from the user's pocket, as in the case of sandwiches, for instance. But to give just like a very concrete example, you can imagine that, for instance, a user makes a swap order for a token A against the token B on some market, let's say Uniswap, deployed on-chain. that user transaction will create a price imbalance with another market that's maybe deployed on the same chain. And so what the producer can do is, seeing that the user has sent them this transaction and that now they're going to pack it in their block, the producer can insert their own transaction that makes a swap in the other direction on a different market and kind of pocket the arbitrage along the way. And so that really gives a lot of power to the producer, and so that makes the position of being the block producer extremely valuable. And so this producer privilege, it's something that we now call maximal extractable value, and really like the, let's say, the rents or the value that the producers are able to get from their position in this chain. Any questions? And so, yeah, in practice, the producers, they may not know where the value is. So in many cases, especially today, post-merge, you can have somewhat unsophisticated block producers. As Caspar mentioned, anybody can become a validator as long as they have sufficient capital and are able to run a node. And so in practice, I might not know how to do arbitrage. I might not know anything about financial market. And so what I would want is for somebody to tell me where these opportunities are. And so in particular, I might want to have a market of people who are trying to compete for telling me what the best thing to do is for me as the block producer. And so these entities that are very good at finding out these opportunities, we call them searchers, and they're the ones who surface opportunities to the block producer. And so now you kind of start deepening this chain of interactions, adding the searchers in the middle. So for instance, the searcher might observe a user making a swap, either through the public mempool or through dark pools or private channels. And the searcher will communicate to a validator, well, there is a swap that is happening. If you pack this swap along with this ARB into a bundle of atomic transactions, so a bundle is something that's meant to be executed like all at once. If you include this bundle, then you can make money from the arbitrage. And you'll have many searchers that are trying to compete to convince the block producer, yeah, this is the bundle you should include in your block. And so this model is actually a pretty classic model that works well in practice if the searcher trusts the producer to keep the bundle atomic. So you might have heard recently of an attack on Ethereum that cost $25 million to a bunch of sandwichers. That attack, actually, let's say the root cause of this attack is that the attacker managed to break the atomicity of this bundle. So was able to receive the contents of this bundle and try to reorganize and modify the contents. And so by breaking that, this $25 million loss was effectively incurred. So that's a very important property. And that really only holds as long as the producer can be trusted not to break this atomicity. So the searcher can say, I give you this bundle, but if they don't trust that the validator won't replace it with different contents, it can lead to very bad outcomes. So you need this trust in the middle. And so what do you do if the producer is untrusted? And as I mentioned in particular, post-merge in Ethereum, we do have people who stake from anywhere. We call them solo stakers. And so there are some proposers, not the large majority, but some share of the network, I think about 6%, who we don't know who they are. They can just sign up to become validators by sending a deposit. And so in that case, the searchers won't really want to send the bundles to these block proposers. They're going to say, well, it's a bit too dangerous for me. I don't know if the block proposer is going to play fair. And so I'm not going to send them these bundles in the clear. And so the design that was arrived at is to say, well, instead of having searchers communicate bundles, which then the producer includes in their block and fills with the rest of transactions, we will just make the whole block for you. And that way, you can just blindside the block. You don't need to know what's in there. You just sign it. And then you propose it to the rest of the network. And you trust that the builder is giving you a good block. But I'll get into that right after this. And so now you have like this even deeper chain. So you have the validator at one end, the user at the other end, and in between like this whole chain of intermediaries that continues to get more denser and denser over time.
But with this design, then what the validator used to do can be done by the builder. Now the builder can.
So the validator does consensus and execution. The builder can do the execution part. Yeah. So the
builder could be
Correct. Yeah, yeah. So the builder and the searcher might want to trust one another. Indeed, yeah. So there are designs now where the builder is replaced by a machine that makes commitments. So like trusted execution environments where you can say, you know, I won't unbundle because the machine like physically cannot let me do this. But yeah, there is a need of like ensuring the atomicity between searchers and bundle and builders.
Does the validator propose to the network a block whose contents it is not privy to?
Yes, and
If the builder crashes, then the validator can get slashed. Not ever be able to find out what that block is.
if a builder crashes, you mean if a builder doesn't give a block?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if a builder doesn't give a block and the validator can't propose one, it's not slashed, it's just a missed block. Currently there's no penalty, they just don't get any reward for it. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll talk a bit.
What happens if it's a bad block?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's why you need a relay, and that's what I will introduce in the next section. Yeah.
Wasn't the relayer was the problem in the $25 million? Yeah.
I can talk about that too as well, but I'll introduce the relay first. Yes?
How is the searcher compensated? I missed that. in
Right.
this ecosystem.
So you can think of it as at every step of the way, there's kind of an auction that's happening. The searcher is saying, I'll bid 10 ETH for you, the builder, to put this arbitrage in there. And maybe the searcher has a take rate, so the searcher keeps 2 ETH for themselves. But if another searcher comes with the same arbitrage and says, I'll give you 11 ETH for that, then the other searcher is going to win. So it's a bit like an auction, and yeah, that happens at both levels. Yeah. Good question.
I'm wondering, the same trust relation that we have with searcher and builders couldn't be the searcher and validators.
Yeah, yeah.
You still need to establish a trust relation.
Right. So if a validator is trusted by the searcher, you could do the old model. But then it means that you're kind of gating. Some validators will get good opportunities because the searchers trust them, and other validators won't.
Right, but now it's something with builders, because some builders will get the opportunity because they get other searchers, others will not.
So builders some builders will be more competitive, indeed. But what's, I would say, something I would have put in the first slide, but I forgot. One key design, or at least one key goal of this, is to try and keep the validator set as unsophisticated as possible, and in particular, prevent economic centralization from different reward rates for different validators. Yeah, yeah. Okay. I think maybe I'll add a bit more color to this picture, and I think some of these questions will also be clearer. All right, so how to use builders. So let's say you're a proposer, you want to get into this market. Like, how does this work in practice? So this block production service, you can think of it in two ways. So on the one hand, you have a proposer who wants to get a good block from a builder, and a good block is a block that gives them the maximum, let's say, return. And on the other hand, you have a builder who wants to obtain a payment from the proposer. We're in trustless systems, distributed systems. It's a classical fair exchange problem. Two parties are trying to come to an agreement, but they don't trust one another. And so there are here classic literature results that tell you, well, you can't do that fair exchange without a trusted third party. And so now, as protocol designer, the question is, what do you make this trusted third party? And today, what we use as a trusted third party, or what these proposers use as a trusted third party, is what we call a relay. In particular, we call that a MEV boost relay. So MEV boost is the name of the protocol that mediates these interactions between the builders and the validators. And the relay sits in the middle to ensure that this agreement is coming to terms, like from both sides. And so in particular, the relay has a couple of roles. One of them is the relay needs to validate the payload of a builder. So the relay sees in the clear the block that the builder is trying to make, and so the relay can check that it's not a bad block, that the block is actually valid and can be proposed to the network. There's a variation on that, which is the optimistic relay, where the relay doesn't immediately check the validity, but asks the builder for a collateral in case the block is eventually invalid. And in that case, the builder would pay if they made an invalid block, so you can do it in this optimistic fashion. The second role of a relay is the builders are making these bids. They're trying to compete to become the builder that's selected by the validator, and so the relay acts as a bid forwarder, sends the bids to the validator. And then in the last step, once the validator chose one of the bids they receive from the relay, and the validator can connect to as many relays as they want. There's also a market for that. So the validator chooses the best bid they have received, or the bid they prefer. They sign it, still without knowing what the block contents are. And they send back the signed bid to the relay. And given this signed bid, now the relay can release the block to the network, which is a valid block, has been signed, and that's it. That's the end of the interactions. And so, yeah, this is a economics conference. People had questions on the economics of relays. They are pretty complicated, and there are many different discussions happening on that. Some are free, kind of like public goods. They say we're trying to bridge this gap that exists in the off-chain infrastructure. Some relays have developed revenue models. In particular, the ultrasound relay has something called the bid adjustment. So they take the difference between the best bid they receive and the second best as a revenue. And so you have like this real supply chain of blocks. And at every step, kind of every actor taking their own take on the profit, and that sort of trickles down all the way to the validator. Yeah.
Is the relay an algorithm or is it a person?
The relay is a server. You can think of it as like a computer that's always online, runs a piece of code that's let's say satisfies the MEV boost protocol, so accepts bits from builders, forwards these bits to the validator, and then receives the signed bit from validator. So it's a piece of code. Some of them are open source, some of them are closed source. All of this is off-chain infrastructure. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay.
So just to follow up, the server, the relay server can be modified by a human being. So obviously it's not a human being who's passing the information, but the relay may be modified to choose some transactions and not others, and favor some transactions and others. Or is there a prescribed way in which all the transactions are treated?
Right. The relay doesn't really get into like the contents of the block themselves. They get the blocks from the builders. So the builders are the ones that are selecting the order of transactions. Some relays decide to receive bits from any builder. Some relays only serve bits from certain builders. So you can think of it as like a graph of, there are builders, there are relays, there are proposers, and they all can connect in arbitrary fashion with one another. Yeah.
Where is reputation most important? Is it the relay?
Yeah, so the relay is the trusted third party in that system, and it's really trusted to do this properly. The main argument that people use is say the relay serves an invalid block, like essentially messing up this interaction between the proposer and the builder. People will immediately see that, like it's very easy to see that an invalid block has been proposed because it's signed. And people will very quickly disconnect from that relay. In fact, you can even gossip some kind of fault proof that the relay has performed and say, within 5 blocks, if the relay doesn't perform well, people will stop trusting it and you just disconnect from it. And so it is based on trust, but with this assumption that it can be replaced somewhat quickly. Yeah.
I'm curious how you personally feel about the introduction of new trusted components.
Yeah, not great. Yeah.
They're not validators. They don't necessarily have a stake. They don't have to have anything to do with Ethereum. It might be, a bunch of people that we know and love today.
Yeah.
But tomorrow it could be all the people from just around here.
Right.
So this could easily turn into, the TradFi system as we know it, with more crypto complications. So I'm curious about your take.
Well, okay. I think it's not like the TradFi system as we know it. Like, I agree that it's a...
It's kind of like the HFT guys over there.
Well, latency plays a role, but I would say it's a bit more subtle than this. But
Kind of like Citadel. How about that?
Citadel is what? Because of order flow?
Yeah, people who peek at order flow and come in with their own transactions.
But that's more the searchers.
Yeah, it's like those three.
I mean, I think there's a lot of questions, and there's like a lot of these interactions that are playing out like in different scales. Like there's latency, there's order flow, There's trust, which is very important. I can answer on the trust. I have answers for all of them. But right now, I'll talk about the trust in the relay. And the thing I will say is we're trying to eliminate that. So we actually have a trusted third party that we like in Ethereum, and it's Ethereum itself. And so you can design solutions in protocol that try to essentially enshrine the role of the relay and make the dependency on the relay not really redundant. It is redundant, more like optional. So you can design in protocol systems that take the relay in, and you don't have to rely on this trusted third party. I'll just show the picture, even though, I've said it, but this is what it looks like today. The Ethereum protocol sees part of what the validators are doing, but it really does not see at all this network of builders, so completely blind to that. We're trying to push it there and say, get the Ethereum protocol to become this trusted third party in the interaction between the proposer and the builder. And in that sense, we don't need to rely on the relay anymore. Agustin.
Just a quick question. So who is really responsible for ensuring that the block is good? Like, is it the builder or the relay? Because the builders are also somewhat making sure that the block is valid.
Yeah.
But then the block is sent through the relay to the proposers,
Yeah.
to the validators, and then they send back to the relay for signature.
Yeah.
But if it's already certified to be good by the builders, why do we need signature?
Right. So an honest builder wants to make a valid block because it's the only way we get paid. But a dishonest builder might make an invalid block just because they want to see the world burn. And we have to think about every adversarial model. Yeah.
An additional layer of
Correct. Yeah. I was just told I have 5 more minutes left, so I'll try to go through. I'm sorry. I'll just finish the section and then maybe I'll take questions at the end. I think the big picture is important and might answer these questions. Like, okay, at every layer there seems to be like different games happening and different players taking money out of one another. Like, is this TradFi all over again? I want to try to make the argument that, okay, some of it might look like it, but these trade-offs are not coming from a bad place. Like, they try to, in fact, lean in to properties of these systems that we think are helpful to scale them and to make them more useful and more protected from economic rents taken at every step. And so the first thing I want to say is that it's kind of a, let's say, philosophy that Vitalik talked about a few years ago, which is this fundamental asymmetry of services that a blockchain might offer. And so the protocol, you can think of it as having these services. So consensus is one, an execution that interprets user transactions, the block production service that elects parties to make blocks. Not all of these services have the same trust requirements. So some of these services definitely require us to have like a very large decentralized set of people kind of keeping check and participating. So honest majority argument or honest supermajority when we need 2/3, for instance, to finalize. But some services really require one person to do the job well and for everyone else to verify that the job was done well. So for instance, we only need one builder to make a block, and then everybody can verify that the block is indeed valid and satisfies the rules of the Ethereum protocol. But the question is, how do we ensure that this party is doing a good job? And so one way to picture it is like, well, it's this the end game. You have this thin, large, spreading layer of validators, which is like at the bottom, kind of checking the work of these big, towering builder entities. That's what it looks like today. There's clearly 3 dominant builders on the market at the moment, Beaver Build, Titan, and rsync builder. And so the question is, well, is that a good state of things? I would argue that not really. We can do better than this. But is it also realistic to imagine that we'll have as many builders as we have validators? Probably not. Like, we don't need to have so many of these entities in the system. We need some of them to do like a good work. By definition, they're more sophisticated. They do this arbitrage and stuff. And so what I think the picture we really want, instead of having like this sort of hierarchy, is more like this. Like, we really want to have this thin layer of validators kind of constraining and leveraging the fact that there are, let's say, more high-powered parties in the middle that are able to perform some of these tasks that don't require like honest majority assumption. So in the last minute, I just want to give like some ideas on, well, how do we constrain them, like these powerful forces, and how do we avoid that they extract rent, that they are trusted, etc. I think we can leverage a lot of the validator decentralization to align the builders. One way of doing this is we want to prevent the builders from imposing their special interests on the makeup of the chains. For instance, there are transactions they might like or transactions they might not like. You have a classic principal agent problem between the validator and the builder. So the validator might want something, the builder something else. There is a mechanism that we discuss in Ethereum land that's called the inclusion list, where the validator is able to kind of tell the builder, you have to put that in your block. You can't just like go wild and do whatever you want. Another thing that would increase market competitivity is partial builders. So right now I told you the builder is making the whole block. That's a lot of space, and it's a lot of ways to kind of become a monopolist. So if you break that up a bit, perhaps you can get more competitivity. And then reduce third-party dependencies like the relay. And I think the solution here looks like enshrinement. So making the protocol like more aware of these things and creating mechanisms to just swallow these third parties. And at the same time as like trying to constrain the builders in a productive way, we also do want to amplify the validator decentralization. So one approach here is a deeper separation. So I talked about proposer-builder separation, but the new concept that excites us is attester-proposer separation. So instead of making the validator the block producer by default, choosing a different set of people to become block producers and essentially unbundling the roles of these protocol services and having like a better attribution of, division of labor. You guys know a lot about that. And then another thing that could be improved is the staking mechanism. So right now, the staking in Ethereum is a bit rudimentary. We hear about that a lot on Twitter especially. I think we can do better. I think there are clearly mechanisms that can help here. But yeah, ask me about that after. Thank you. Do I have time for a question? 1 minute? Okay.
Quick question.
Yes.
In the TradFi world, next week we're reducing the settlement time from 2 days to 1 day.
Yeah.
Do you think that reducing the settlement time from 12 seconds to a shorter interval would deal with some of the front-running problems? And what do you think that would do? And what would be the issues involved?
Right. So actually, there's people talking about this stuff. They call it pre-confirmation, and they try to say, well, what if you can get a guarantee, like you send your transaction and somebody tells you you're in and at this price and on that state, and you get like a good state out of this. The thing is, you can't settle faster than the protocol is running. So in particular, you can't get faster finality settlement than 12 minutes. You can't move faster than the block time. Anything you do. Okay, so shortening the block time is hard just because, again, we want to keep the validator layer as decentralized as possible, and shortening it just increases the hardware requirements and makes that thin band a bit thicker, which is not something we want. Yeah. Stop. Okay, Mike.